Hey, this is Neil's Own Dynasty. Please like, share, and subscribe. Buy some silver, some platinum, and some crystallized osmium. It's not financial advice, it's sound advice. And be kind, helpful, grateful, because it's better than being a jerk. But that's not what this is about, as usual. This is from 4 hours ago. Business Basics. India's plan to trap and checkmate China. What? But they're BRICS. They're all kumbaya. Neil, you've shown a lot of videos about how they don't like each other and how they're fixing to go to war, but we don't believe you. Keep bringing the videos showing us that India and China are not buddies and how BRICS will fail because of it. Hold on, wait. BRICS is an economic thing? Okay, watch this. Bye-bye, BRICS.
Has launched a war against China. And it's not a war that will be fought on the battlefield. Rather, it's a war that will be fought economically. India has started emerging as the next great powerhouse of Asia in order to counter China's aggression. New Delhi has now positioned itself as an alternative for companies that are getting tired of being used like a pawn in the CCP's grand ambition towards taking over the world. Companies like Apple are already moving to India to set up for a world after China. India has slowly launched its own global project.
What? Apple's moving to India to set up for a world after China? What have they not been telling you that I have been?
Projects to counteract China's growing influence from the Belt and Road Initiative. Prime Minister Modi has started India's own lending program for its neighbors in order to stop China from gaining influence by using its debt trap diplomacy.
Debt trap?
So
what?
Today, let's go over how India became China's greatest threat.
The head of MI6 last year accused China of using debt traps to gain leverage over countries.
Sri Lanka sought China's financial help. The country took loans worth $45 billion from various countries, including more than $8 billion from China.
An agreement for a $1 billion credit line from India.
Fast patrol.
Hold on. Wait. What was that? What was that?
Financial help. The country took loans worth $45 billion from various countries,
Listen.
including more than $8 billion from China.
An agreement for a $1 billion credit.
$1 billion US dollar credit line from India. So India, the BRICS nation, is pushing the US dollar to be the world reserve currency. While they're in BRICS and people think they're all kumbaya, loving and happy, peace. I told you, man, India's going to be its own reserve currency. They love the dollar. They hate BRICS. I don't even know why they're in it. It's a head fake.
Line from India.
Fast patrol vessel will be the fourth ship to be gifted by India to Seychelles.
Pakistan is all set to receive a $700 million loan from China to help it shore its foreign exchange reserves, which are at a 10-year low.
This video took a lot of effort. Recently, my videos have been getting age restricted, which severely hurts their reach with the algorithm. So let's start from the beginning. Something that might surprise most of you is the fact that historically, India and China were strong allies and friendly economic partners. The Silk Road linked the cities of Xi'an in China.
It's your time to...
In India. Trade on the tea and horse road, as the Chinese called it, was a significant factor in the growth of Chinese and Indian civilizations. Coming into modern history, both civilizations had their hands full with their colonizers, as India had the British and China had the Japanese. That didn't stop their leaders from supporting each other. Even under British rule, Indian leaders publicly showed their support for China's struggles against the Japanese. In 1939, future Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, visited China as an honored guest of the government. Both countries actually helped each other in their battles. India helped China against the Japanese and Western imperialism, and in return, China supported India's independence movement against the British. Then, in 1947, India gained its independence from the British Empire. And 2 years later, in 1949, the People's Republic of China, or PRC, came into power in China. This is where the relationship could have soured. Up to this point, Indian leaders had been friendly with the ROC, the Republic of China. When Mao Zedong's PRC came into power, the ROC fled mainland China and took over Taiwan. I'm sure you guys are already familiar with the China-Taiwan issue, so I won't go into it right now. But good relations between the two nations continued, even under new leadership. In fact, India was one of the first countries in the world to recognize the People's Republic of China as the official government of China. Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru also became the first foreign leader to visit the PRC in China in 1954, this time to meet with the PRC leader Mao Zedong. Nehru described the visit as the most important foreign mission of his life. He considered India and China to be very similar. He believed as a newly free nation, they couldn't trust the West. They needed to depend on each other to grow their economy and improve living conditions for their citizens.
That didn't work out well
They
for
jointly
him.
signed and advocated for the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. But peace, it didn't last long.
Yep.
As soon as the CCP came into power in 1950, they forcibly took over the autonomous region of Tibet by sending loads of military personnel. I have a full video on this story, which was actually demonetized and restricted by YouTube the first time I uploaded it. Good times. I highly recommend you check it out for the full details on this story. But here's a quick recap. After taking over the region in 1950, the CCP slowly kept increasing its military presence in Tibet. As you can imagine, this really pissed off the local Tibetan population, as the CCP was not giving them their religious and cultural freedom. Chairman Mao wanted Tibet to be a Chinese territory. It didn't matter to him that the people there had their own culture and history. So in 1958, a rebellion broke out in Tibet against CCP forces. Tibetans wanted to kick out the CCP and take back their land. But Mao decided to send in even more forces to reassert his dominance. Local Tibetan rebels stood no chance against the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, who had a numbers advantage and experience on their side. India was closely following this clampdown. India had always had a friendly relationship with Tibet, including an economic relationship where North India would freely trade with Tibet. Indian leaders decided not to get involved in this fight, as to not cause a war with their neighbor. Mao, on the other hand, did not share the same feelings about keeping the peace. Declassified documents from decades later have shown that Mao was always paranoid that India was colluding with the USA and the Soviets to overthrow Chinese leadership. Looking back, this really doesn't make any sense. The USA and the USSR were in a pretty intense Cold War in the 1960s. And while India was a neutral nation that was friendly with both sides, I highly doubt the USA and the Soviet Union would set aside the Cold War and collude together to overthrow the leadership in China. Anyway, coming back to the Tibet story. In 1959, the Dalai Lama, fearing for his life in Tibet, fled to India, where he was granted asylum. This, of course, didn't please Chairman Mao, as he saw this action as India playing a role in supporting the rebels against the CCP. This in turn made him more aggressive towards India, and Mao decided to show his aggression by encroaching on India's borders. Speaking of borders, there's one point I quickly want to go over that's actually pretty important. In 1914, while India was still under British control, representatives from Britain, China, and Tibet gathered to determine the status of Tibet. China agreed to allow Tibet to be an autonomous region and remain under Chinese control, but they refused to put the promise in a treaty.
Hey guys, JD Vance here.
Tibet, on the other hand, signed a treaty creating this line called the McMahon Line. India, to this day, accepts the McMahon Line as the official legal border between India and Tibet. The CCP, on the other hand, well, they didn't accept the McMahon Line, and in 1959, they kept pushing the limits of these borders to show their displeasure. This caused both sides to increase their military presence around the border. And then, in August of 1959, the first bloody clash erupted between the two nations. On the west side of the border, Chinese soldiers pushed into Indian territory. Then, a month later, clashes happened on the east border. This is when India learned that China had built a road inside of Indian territory, which has remained a pretty big issue to this day. To settle these issues, China offered India the west side of the border if India agrees to give China more territory on the east side. India, of course, declined this offer, and firefights kept happening for the next few years. Then, in 1962, Chinese soldiers discovered an Indian post in territory that they believed to be under China's borders. This news traveled to Mao, and he saw this as the final straw.
Act of
Mao
War,
decided to send
1962.
Tens of thousands of soldiers in secret to both east and west sides of disputed borders. The People's Liberation Army swiftly launched an attack on both sides, surprising the Indian soldiers who were both outnumbered and inexperienced. The PLA, on the other hand, had plenty of fighting experience from their wars in Korea, Vietnam, and Taiwan. Indian troops suffered a humiliating defeat, and the CCP was able to capture much of Indian territory. The Indian Army tried setting up a counteroffensive by bringing in more soldiers, but Mao was ready for it, and squashed it pretty easily. This is when India asked the USA military for help to take back its territory. At this time, the USA was one of the only two countries who had nukes, the second one being the Soviet Union. Surprisingly, this was also one of the few issues that the USA and the Soviets agreed on. They both saw China as the aggressor in this situation, and since China didn't want to experience their own Hiroshima, they decided to withdraw most of their troops from Indian territory. However, the CCP did decide to keep control of a piece of Indian territory here, in the Aksai China region, the same area where they had built a road connecting Xiansheng to Lhasa. Remember this, as this is an issue still to this day.
Yep.
Another ideological goal Mao had.
That would be PL-71, where they're still fighting today. I've done a couple of videos on it. This thing goes on for another half hour. I'm not going to go ahead and bore you guys with this. I'm just letting you know. The bloodlust of China for Indian blood has been there since 1959. And they still want expansionism, and they see India as weak. Right now, currently, today, they are doing the exact same thing they did in 1962 by building up forces on the Indian border. They have built 2 Air Force bases and piled 250,000 army troops on the border preparing for war with their BRICS kumbaya, love thy neighbor, India. So, I don't know how they're going to make BRICS work when they're killing each other. Having said that, yeah, go BRICS. Woohoo!